Hola y bienvenidos otra vez a mi canal de YouTube Español por Dentro. Estoy aquí con el embajador Sandeep Kumar, un embajador muy destacado que ha viajado a muchos países, que ha representado la India en muchos países y yo he tenido la suerte de estar aquí con él. Él me ha invitado al Club Holiday Club en Panchsheel Enclave en sur de Delhi. Y vamos a hablar con él un poco sobre su trayectoria, sobre su carrera como diplomático. Ambassador Sandeep, thank you so much for giving me your time. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And thank you very much for having me over. It's a pleasure.
So I was telling my viewers in Spanish earlier that I've had the good fortune of meeting you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really sorry I got late today,
No, that's fine.
But thank you very much for inviting me over here. So I just gave Ambassador Sandeep a couple of my books which I've translated, and I've had the honor of him receiving it. Please, Ambassador Sir, whenever you get the chance to read, please do let me know how it is.
No, definitely, and it looks very good. You gave me the context of that, and very interesting, and I shall definitely find time to go through those lovely books.
Thank you. And once again, Ambassador Sandeep, thank you for inviting me to this beautiful club that we are here at the Holiday Club in Panchsheel Enclave. I'm having black coffee, and Sandeep, Ambassador Sandeep, what are you having?
I'm having nimbu pani, which is lemon water. Yeah. Which kills the heat.
Which kills the heat. Yes, it's extremely important in this heat that we are in right now. So, Ambassador Sandeep has,
and it's also healthy.
And it's also healthy, absolutely. So, Ambassador Sandeep has represented India, as I was telling in Spanish. He has been the ambassador of India to various countries. Ambassador Sandeep was also telling me a little bit off air about his experience, especially in Afghanistan. So, why not we start with that, Ambassador Sandeep? How was your time in Afghanistan? Some memories that you have. How was it overall, the experience there?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. To be honest, I didn't want to go to Afghanistan when I did, which was in 2005. But then I said to myself, I'll just go there. It'll be a different country, new experiences, new adventures, new stories, and that's how I landed up. And I was supposed to be there for 2 years, but I stayed there for 7 years. Wow. I was 3 years with the Indian Embassy as the Deputy Ambassador, and 4 years I was with the United Nations Development Program, looking after their projects on police reforms.
Okay.
So it was a fantastic experience, and you wouldn't stay in a country that long until you feel for it. And I ended up writing a book called On Edge, Passage to Afghanistan, which was my personal experiences of not just working in the embassy, but just my personal life, going out, reaching out to people. And I dedicated it to the women and children of Afghanistan, because for me, they were the backbone of society. They kept everything together despite the war, despite the bombings, life went on. And it was mostly through the women and children. And people asked me that, how could you stay in Afghanistan for 7 years? Who were your idols? And for me, an ordinary woman walking on the street in Afghanistan every single day was my idol. I didn't need any high-flying or any top heroes to be my idols, because these were the common people walking on the ground, and despite all the challenges, still making a living and making their country grow. And that time it was growing democratically in terms of development, in terms of women empowerment, youth empowerment, etc.
Ambassador Sandeep, it's interesting you mentioned about the challenges that the Afghani common person possessed day to day. Could you share a little bit what kind of challenges were there in a daily life of a common Afghani person during that time?
Mostly to security related, because Taliban, different factions of Taliban were still very active. Even the Indian Embassy was bombed in 2008, and I myself survived, although some of my colleagues could not. And many Afghan children were killed in that attack as well. But there were attacks happening all the time, and one just waddled through, the daily life, the security challenges, and especially the Afghan people. We had protection, we had security regulations. We needed to go in armored vehicles, having armored vests. But those people of Afghanistan, didn't have those kind of protections. They were just going out on the streets as vulnerable people. And yet they were strong, they were gritty, they were determined to make it through. So the main challenge was the security challenge. And despite the presence of a huge international community, but they were all equipped with, handling that challenge, which was happening not just in Kabul, but in all the states, particularly the border states in Afghanistan. And apart from that, there was the challenge of development, the country making. India itself was, undertaking a $1.4 billion developmental assistance program for Afghanistan. I was heading it at that time. There were a lot of youth who were coming to India. Every year there were 1,000 youth who were being sent to India to study in our top institutions. There were women empowerment programs, entrepreneurship, etc. We were getting teams from India to train them. So there were all countries which were involved in the huge, massive developmental assistance program in all fields: infrastructure, health, women, children, the whole works.
Amazing. It's interesting you say all this, Ambassador Sandeep, because I feel we in India are so lucky to be in a country where at least, yes, there are issues, there are problems like every country has. But then to be able to walk on the road safely and without any fear, it's something that we take it for granted. But if you look at what you have shared about the Afghan people and many other countries today, the kind of security threats that are there in most of the countries, we should be grateful and proud of being in a country like India. So just going forward, Ambassador Sandeep, you were also deployed at the United Nations. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I was handling a project which was aimed to enhancing the police force in Afghanistan. Most of it was funded by the United States, but there were several other countries, including European countries and other countries who were also involved. So it was a whole capacity building. It was the training programs to provide them that edge to be able to have independent operations, and combined with the army training, which was also being done with the US. So it was a huge program. I spent about 4 years, but of course, every program needed a lot of time, especially when it came to the security sector, and police reforms, fitted into that. So I had a very challenging time. It was a huge project. I did my best. And even at the time of leaving Afghanistan, 4 years with the United Nations, 3 years with the Indian Embassy, my spirit didn't want to go. It just wanted to stay. And I remember that there used to be a child outside my hotel, and he was banned from entering the hotel. He was Afghan, and he could only wait on the steps. So every morning when I would come from the hotel where I was staying, he would hold my finger, put me in drop me to the car. And every evening around 7 or 8, when I would come back in the car, he would still be there whole day, 12 hours. He would, I would open the gate, he would hold my finger, lead me to the steps, and he knew his boundaries. He couldn't go further. So the day I was leaving for the airport, my last day, I still sat with him on the steps, and he pointed his finger to the sky. And there was a kite which was, fluttering in the sky. And there's a painting I had done, because I also painted, of a woman looking at a kite in the sky through the burqa. And it reminded me of that painting, because that kite was carrying with it her dreams, her aspirations, because the Afghan women can only dream so much. And she knows that after a while that kite will be strung, it will come down, and her dreams will come crashing down. But at least till that moment, it's flying. So when I was leaving at the airport, this guy is pointing out at a kite which is going higher and higher into the sky. It's not getting cut. It's just soaring into the sky. And for me, that represented hope and faith. So I came back with a very positive and optimistic mindset about Afghanistan. A few years later, of course, that was proven wrong, because the Taliban took over and the situation has changed completely. But even while leaving, my spirit seemed to still linger on in Afghanistan.
It's a very moving experience that you've shared, Ambassador Sandeep. Thank you so much for that. You were also Indian Ambassador to Croatia.
And to Ireland as well.
And to Ireland as well. So, tell us a little bit about that experience, because I'm sure being in European countries would have had a very different experience as compared to being in Afghanistan.
Yeah, Ireland was, I retired from Ireland. A beautiful country, and most importantly, very beautiful people in terms of, the humaneness, the kindness, and one of the most integrated and inclusive countries in the world. I mean, where in the world will you have a 40-year-old Indian origin doctor who was openly gay, who was chosen to be the Prime Minister of that country? It talks volumes about inclusivity and integrity, and communities coming together. And I was there during the time of COVID, and I saw that happen firsthand, where everybody reached out, where there was leadership, where all the students or and it was difficult to handle a situation with a huge 100,000 population, 10,000 Indian students, and we had just an embassy in Ireland with no consulates. So we created these groups, support groups from different cross sections of society on a purely voluntary basis, and they flashed out their numbers 24/7. Every single person was being helped, every single student was being counseled, and there were doctors who were giving free services. There were these Sikhs running gurdwaras who were giving free food packets, and when anybody would spot them on red lights going out delivering food packets, even the police people manning those red lights would stop and clap for them. They were the warriors. They were the COVID warriors. So it was a huge experience for me. I traveled the length and breadth of the country. The people were so welcoming, and wherever you go, you hear one phrase: "You are very welcome." So that was the kind of reception one got. And then, of course, one did a lot in terms of building bilateral relationship in the political field, of course, but also in the cultural field, in the economic field. There were many Indian companies who were working there. They were contributing solidly to the local economy. There were a lot of Indian healthcare workers from Kerala and other places who were involved in the healthcare sector, in different hospitals, and the local people were just saying that they couldn't do without them. So it was we worked hard in science and technology and education. As I said, so many Indian students there, contributing to the education system. So it was a very, very invigorating experience, even at the time of COVID, which was one of the greatest challenges of the century.
Right. Very interesting. And how about Croatia, Ambassador Sandeep? How was it over there for you?
Croatia was a little bit different. There weren't that kind of Indian population. Or Indian professionals or healthcare workers, although it's growing rapidly now at a different scale and a different level. But again, a very beautiful country, and I keep saying to everybody that, in India, we have one Goa. Although we have a huge coastline, we have 1.4 billion people, but we have one Goa. In Croatia, a tiny country, 5 million people, and a beautiful Mediterranean coastline, they would have at least 10 to 15 Goas. It's so well developed. It's the infrastructure, the service sector, and the life, the vibrancy, the positivity. I was so amazed. And everywhere you go, you would say, "Oh, I've seen it all. Now I can't see something more beautiful." And then you would go to another city, and that will confound your senses even more. So, it was a very interesting experience. And then I saw there were a lot of these Croatians who had adopted Indian ways of life. They were white Croatian people who had adopted Indian way of life. They had been practicing with their gurus. They came to India every year. They've even taken on Indian names, Indian lifestyles, wearing Indian clothes, saris, sindoor, bindis, participating in all Indian festivals, whether it's Art of Living organization, whether it's yoga in daily life, and hundreds and thousands, not just in the capital Zagreb, but throughout Croatia. And when we would do this International Yoga Day, it would be done in at least 20 to 25 cities across Croatia, and people would come out in hordes. Why? Because they respected that culture. They said, we don't get that kind of satisfaction and sustenance in our own religion. And church was at that time being looked on a little skeptically, like we do in the Indian philosophy. And this was an eye-opener for me, and very, very satisfying. So we worked a lot with them in various different fields: culture, education, business, again, in whichever way that we could find compatibilities. And then there was the history of, Portuguese and Goa and other places. And similarly, the churches and the maritime cultures in India and our coastal areas. So I tried to link up in various ways the sectors which were complementary to both the countries.
Wonderful. Ambassador Sandeep, you have been a diplomat, you've been an author, you've authored a book. You're also a painter. Tell us a little bit about that. When did you develop that hobby, and what kind of paintings you like to do?
I've just developed this hobby on my own. I haven't taken any formal classes, except in South Africa when I was just doing a little bit of training. But mostly I and I like to be called, in the mold of the Impressionists. And Monet is my all-time favorite.
Right.
What I did in most of these countries where I worked, that and portraits is not really my style that much as the landscapes and abstracts. But in each of these countries, I did the portraits of the president or the prime minister. For instance, when I was in South Africa, it was Nelson Mandela. When I was in Afghanistan, it was President Karzai. When I was in Croatia, it was Kolinda, who was the president. When I was in Ireland, it was Leo Varadkar, who was the prime minister, and then there's the president as well. So in each of these countries, when I would ask them to give those paintings, I would get a huge opportunity to meet with them. In South Africa, President Nelson Mandela invited us at his private home for lunch, just so that we could hand over that painting to him. So that built such a bond, and that gave us an opportunity to discuss the whole gamut of India relationship with that particular country. And if there were issues, if there were thorns, the president or the prime minister would immediately pick up the phone and try to resolve it. So I use that as a tactic to be able to promote the relationship between India and that particular country. And in Ireland in particular, when I was there, and it was COVID time, I donated around 30 paintings to 2 charities, and 2 which were most affected by COVID. One was autism and one was mental health. And nobody could say during that time that I'm fine. It was okay not to be okay. And we all understood that. So I donated 30 paintings to 2 charities. They raised about 30 lakhs. And this was just before I left and before I retired. So this was my way of saying thank you to Ireland. And in the same vein, I may just mention that even 27 years before I went as ambassador to Ireland, I was studying in Cambridge, UK. And I went as a student, which was in the early 90s. And that time, there were hardly any Indian origin people. It was still not the member of the EU. It was still a developing country. And what I was doing was hitchhiking, because everybody told me that if you don't hitchhike in Ireland, your visit won't be complete. Today, it's different. There are all highways everywhere. You can't do that. But at that time, in early 90s, I was hitchhiking. People were stopping. There was so much kindness. They were giving me lifts. And when I went back, I told everybody that so much has changed over the last 25 years. Ireland has become a developed country, joined the European Union, proud member. There's so many Indian people now here, so many Indian students. There's construction activity everywhere. But one thing which hasn't changed is the kindness and the generosity of the Irish spirit because of the people. They would still tell stories, they would still lead you, there would still be benches which would say, come sit with me, share your story. So that was the Irish spirit, and that continues to really inspire me. So yes, I was painting. I did a lot of painting during time of COVID. Even just I would post them just to lift spirits of the people. And I think art and painting can be a huge solace and sustenance in times of challenges.
Ambassador Sandeep, one last question. I want to take you all the way back to the foundation of your career, which was the UPSC exams. You just told me a while back off air that you had one of your papers as French literature, and being a Spanish literature student, for me it's very curious to know that how you ended up learning French, and what was the level of French, because for you to be able to give a French literature paper, you must have had a very good level of French. So how was the interest in French that developed for you?
It's kind of a little bit crazy, because nobody takes French literature in UPSC, and especially when you haven't reached that level. And I hadn't reached any level at all. I was studying English literature in St. Stephen's College. I did my BA and I should have logically chosen English literature.
Yes.
But while I was doing English literature, just on a part-time basis, I was going 3 times a week, just for an hour, to the Department of Modern European Languages in the Delhi University, just to learn French, because, and my interest in French, a friend of mine was filling up his form to learn French, and just looking at him, I also filled it up, and I got a placement, and I just continued. So 3 years, I just did an advanced part-time course in French, based on which I had the audacity to take a whole paper in French literature and leaving and abandoning English literature, which was my key subject. I just wanted to be different. I know I took a huge risk. You cannot take this lightly, but I did. And luckily, I got through. My other paper was law, so it was a weird combination, law and French, literature. But because I did study French law after I studied English, but somehow I managed to get through. I studied hard. I was disciplined, and I continued also with my fitness in all these postings that I have been. And talking about fitness, that's a passion apart from art. And in Afghanistan, I also participated in Mr. Afghanistan bodybuilding competition at a time when bombs were going everywhere and security was still a huge issue, and no foreigner was actually participating in those competitions. But I wanted to be different. I wanted to be part of the sporting culture. And even the day, and in 2008, the Indian embassy was bombed, as I said, and just the next day was my competition. And my ambassador told me that please go and participate because I want talking points for the Afghanistan president that we are not cowed down by Taliban, we are not cowed down by terrorism. We will continue to go out there and support you in the field of sports, in the field of cultural integrity. And that's what I did. And it was all in the newspapers. But sports, again, like art, can play a huge factor in building relationships.
Lovely story. I know, Ambassador Sandeep, that I told that this was supposed to be the last question, but something that just cropped up in my mind when you spoke about your time in South Africa. You met the former president, Mr. Mandela, Nelson Mandela, a huge figure whom people like me have only been able to read up in school books. How was it? How was that experience to meet such a world leader, a huge figure like Mr. Nelson Mandela? How was your experience of just meeting him?
As I shared with you, the meeting was to present that portrait I did of him and his wife. And he invited us to his private home in Johannesburg. And the experience was, absolutely amazing. Because of the whole history behind him, the long walk to freedom, march to freedom, his life struggle. We also visited the Robben Island where, his jail was, and, the conditions that they lived in, and just the way he, the bravery, the courage, the determination, the fortitude that he showed over around 30 years to be able to, carry this struggle forward, to get people behind him. Yeah. And even after he was released, the trait which really fascinated me was the humility with which he was greeting people. Yeah. The way he was so down to earth, and he continued to guide the country, continued to be the guiding force, the shining light of South Africa, which was so amazing.
Amazing. To be able to encapsulate your extremely successful career as a diplomat in just about 20 minutes. I know you told me that we can keep it to 15 minutes, but the chat just went on, and just a fascinating journey of your experience. I think it's worth spending this much time that we have. So thank you so much, Ambassador Sandeep, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear your experiences, hear your achievements, and I wish to stay in contact with you.
No, absolutely. And anytime that you would like to even talk to me on sports and sporting culture and fitness, I'd also be happy to do that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sandeep. Bueno, esto fue el embajador Sandeep Kumar, con quien he hablado hasta el otro capítulo, otro episodio de Español por Dentro. Chao.
Bye-bye.